super excited for the talk today, and thank you so much for your time, Jakob, for being here. On behalf of everyone, I'd like to say you're a huge inspiration to everyone in the design community, and I'm very honored to be doing this fireside chat with you today.
Thank you. I did all this work is to inspire people, yeah.
Perfect. Well, there's 3 topics that I want to dive into with you today. I want to talk about the past, present, and future of the design industry as it pertains to AI in this ever-changing, fast-paced world. So let's jump into it. So my very first question for you is actually all about your 10 usability heuristics, which today is the 31st anniversary of when you coined them originally, which is an amazing accomplishment. Yes. And one of the things that I'm curious about is how it pertains to generative AI tools, right? So a lot of us who have used generative AI, you've probably noticed that the interfaces are incredibly simple, right? Which could mean that it's not using some of the heuristic principles. So for example, one of your heuristic principles is all around error prevention, which means essentially if you were a user and you inputted something wrong, the system should let you know what the feedback is. But a lot of generative AI tools, sometimes it's really hard to tell when you make a mistake. So what I'm actually curious about, Jakob, is do you feel like in this age of AI that your usability heuristics still apply, or do you feel like they should evolve?
Yeah. I think that they still apply. They still are still solid. And the reason that the heuristics are solid is exactly because they are heuristics. And I should just explain, because this is a word that I actually regret using or coming up with back 31 years ago, because it's a little bit too convoluted. But anyway, now we have it, right? So heuristics means general rules or rule of thumbs. They're very broad. They're not these very specific design standards that have their role as well, and that actually do change over the years with new technologies. But heuristics really relate to how humans use technology and what are the main barriers to accomplishing things with technology. And that doesn't change because humans don't change. And so a lot of these different principles, you mentioned the one about error recovery. I mean, well, errors will happen. I mean, we'd like to reduce them, but they will happen. And so that is inherent. And I just think that they're not used well in current AI tools. And I do say that they have been getting better over the last 2 years, but not at a high pace. And I believe the reason for that is that AI came out of the AI research, the AI scientists who are experts in machine learning and all these other different disciplines, which are all nice, and I know enormous respect for that work they've been doing. That said, they are all technologists and mathematicians and so forth. They don't understand the human factors. And furthermore, I think they suffer under the curse. The curse of human factors or usability has always been that developers and the people who create systems know too much about their own system. They know too much about their own technology, specifically about their own design. They know how to use their own design because they made it. And they are also, to be honest, higher IQ than us, or even particularly on the average user. So for all of these different reasons, for them it's natural to use these interfaces, but it's not for the average person. So we have these things like the articulation barrier for AI. I mean, you can say anything. That's nice, but what? What can you say? What can you do? And how do you recover from errors? There's very little support for that. And I mean, even to this day, like some of the most recent things that came out is from OpenAI, the ChatGPT native image mode, which is again a wonderful technological improvement. However, when there is a mistake in the image, which there often is, it's hard to really correct it because you can kind of mark an error of the image and say, change this, but they actually regenerate the entire image, so they change other parts of the image as well. And that makes it very hard to make any kind of image where you want multiple components, like a comic strip or an infographic or anything of that nature. So error recovery is actually hard because of the way they designed the native image mode. You could compare that to Midjourney, and I have endless criticism of Midjourney from a UI perspective. But that said, one thing they actually get right is this in-paint ability, that you mark an area on an image, and then you say what you want changed, and it only changes the part you marked. All the rest is left alone. So they've invented some technology whereby they can kind of integrate the change with the remaining image. I don't know how they do it, but they do that, and the other guys should have done that as well. So that's just an example, but I feel like there's a lot of examples by which the AI tools today do not comply with like good, old established usability principles. And I believe the main reason for that is we have not had enough UX people, enough design people, enough usability research even on those tools. They came all out of the people who know how to create the technology, not how to make it work with humans.
Yes, I love that, Jakob. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. I want to talk a little bit more about ethics and bias. I know that's something that a lot of us are very interested in, especially being in the design industry, right? And with the advent of technology, there's always both positive and negative aspects of it, and especially we're already seeing that with AI, right? It's helping us do our work a lot better, but also there's a lot of negative depictions of it in the media. So for example, like we've heard of a story of a black man in Detroit named Robert Williams who was wrongfully convicted of a crime that he did not commit because the AI facial recognition mixed him up with somebody else. So you generally talk about AI in a very positive and optimistic light in a lot of your articles, but I'm curious from your perspective, is there anything that you fear about AI? And if so, are there things that we as designers should be very mindful of as we're working with these systems?
Yeah. To be honest, what I fear the most is that it's slowed down too much based on the negative press coverage, because the media, has an enormous negativity bias. We know the slogan, if it bleeds, it leads, which makes people fear too much because you get all the negative coverage all the time. That is inherent in media, and it's also in Hollywood and movies and fictional television shows. Always conflict is a good story, and so the emphasis the negative parts too much. And I think that there's so strong upsides to AI that delaying it is actually what is the biggest ethical problem we have. Because, and the problem that is that diffused. You're not going to see the millions of people who are getting a worse education because they don't have AI in, let's say, Africa or other poor areas, or the patients who are getting worse treatment because they could have been diagnosed better with AI, or again in a poor country or a rural, remote area where they don't have the experts or specialist doctors. They could have a specialist AI no matter where you are in the world, So a lot of these benefits are diffused and would accrue to millions or billions actually of people if we got better AI sooner. And then you get strong coverage of individual negative problems, which is not to say that one shouldn't address those problems, right? But the beauty, I believe, of AI is that every time something goes wrong, you can and you should fix it so that the same thing doesn't go wrong the next time, or similar things don't go wrong next time. So use ideas like reinforcement learning and whatever to adjust. So that's it. I mean, there are benefits and downsides of computers relative to people, but one of the benefits of computers is that we can actually fix the bugs. Whereas in humans, if one person does something wrong, you could say, don't do that, but a billion other people will make similar mistakes next year, and you can't fix them. With computers, we can fix them. This is why I'm super, super optimistic about things like self-driving cars or computer-driven cars, because like just in the US alone, we have 40,000 people killed per year by human-driven cars. Mm-hmm. And so with the current Waymo, I think, has the best accident statistics of them all. So their statistics are they have about 20% of the accidents as human-driven cars. So if you converted all cars in the United States to being AI-driven cars, right, the number of people killed in traffic per year would go from 40,000 to 8,000. So two things we're looking at that. Right? AI would save 32,000 people per year being killed in traffic, but the newspaper headline would be AI kills 8,000 people.
Yes, that's a very, very interesting perspective, Jakob. So I want to talk a little bit more about some of your perspectives on accessibility. So last year and this year, you've actually written 2 different articles claiming that accessibility is dead, actually, in the age of AI. And I know that has drawn a little bit of criticism from some accessibility advocates who don't believe that AI is actually going to be a silver bullet in terms of solving all these accessibility needs for disabled users. So I'm actually really curious from your perspective, 1, why do you have this perspective? And 2, why do you think it's more important to accelerate accessibility in AI versus fixing the systematic issues at hand right now with existing products?
Right. Because I think with AI we can do it one time, whereas if you've got to fix every single website and every single other digital product, that's millions or hundreds of, I don't even know how many there are, but there's a lot anyway. Empirical evidence shows that just is not happening. I mean, we just know that there's endless accessibility problems on existing digital products. And so I think that when you've tried, and I have tried, I mean, if you look at my book, Designing Web Usability, it had an entire chapter on accessibility, which was very rare 25 years ago in web design to care about that. So, I've been pushing for it for more than 25 years, and many other people have done it as well, obviously. And yet, we have a situation where it's in a poor state. Whereas with AI, it's like, one time or maybe 10 times if there are 10 different major AI labs that's going to be there in the future. It's a small number is kind of the point anyway. And so I think there's a much more chance of this kind of centralized approach. And the reason I'm very optimistic about AI to help for people with disabilities is that it can adapt the information on the fly to people's needs, right? So it can be individualized user interface. Whereas, so whatever people's problem is, and one of the reasons we should care about accessibility is that it's the one thing we all sort of hope we will face one day, because the alternative is you don't get to live long enough to have various problems, right? So eyesight starts fading at age 40 and memory at around age 60 and so forth. And the older you get, the more of these problems you have. But AI can, for example, if somebody is a low literacy person that has a hard time reading, it can simplify information to be, we used to recommend right at an 8th grade reading level, and it's almost impossible to do any kind of advanced information. But AI can actually adapt information to whatever the user's ability to understand complex information is. This is already being used in a few places in the healthcare sector for give people these after visit summaries of what they did. So there's some of the studies have shown that when people have been to see a doctor and they leave, they kind of don't know understand half of what was being said, and they also don't understand what's being written to them as well. But AI can write it in a way that they will understand it. And similarly, if somebody's blind, you can't see the screen, right? So the current approach is we take something that's optimized for a graphical user interface, and then we make it possible for it to be read aloud. Well, that will always be bad. Whereas AI can take the underlying feature, the underlying information, and directly translate it into an auditory user interface. Or if people had any other problem, well, it translated into a presentation that works well with whatever abilities people do have. So I think that the ability for AI to transform information and be individualized for people's particular needs, I feel that has enormous potential. Now, I should say that you sort of said that accessibility is dead. I'm not sure that it's dead yet, but I think it's the wrong approach for the future. So that's maybe more the correct way of thinking about it. But I think for the future anyway, when I say future, maybe in 5 years or so, but having AI create representations of the features that are optimized for the user's needs and capabilities has vastly more potential than it does to try to retrofit onto hundreds of millions of websites, which we just know is not being done.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that, Jakob. I want to pivot to our last topic, talking about the future of AI in the design industry. And I know it's very top of mind for a lot of us who work in the industry today. So one of the trends that we've been noticing, especially in the macroeconomic climate, is that there has been a compression of technology jobs overall. So since 2023, I think we've seen around about 26% 6% of decline in technology jobs. And a lot of people think that has to do with AI coming out and competing for these jobs, or for the skills that we would be doing, rather, in technology. And you've even said in one of your articles yourself that you believe that potentially with design agencies that are bigger than the size of 10, they may not exist much longer either. So with all that being said, if there's a decline in terms of ROI on design, you have actually indicated that that's actually not a signal of failure for us in the design industry. It's actually a signal of success. So can you help explain that perspective more in terms of what you mean by that a decline of ROI is actually a good thing for the design industry? And then a second part to that question is that for those of us who are in design leadership, who are on like in the trenches now trying to fight for headcount, what are some proof points that we can bring to prove that design is still valuable?
Right, certainly. Yeah, so I want to first clarify that when I say that UX has had the declining return on investment, that doesn't mean no return on investment, it just means smaller than it used to be. And it used to be stupendously big for two reasons, which is, first of all, design was truly terrible. So if you think back, I mean, now I'm talking about a longer historical perspective, not like last year, but I'm talking about like 25 years ago, things like that. The first websites during the early dot-com bubble were atrociously bad. Not just bad, but atrociously bad. Same is true for things like DOS, Unix, mainframes, all of those early software, early websites were incredibly bad and extremely difficult to use. So people today, I mean, you just don't know how good you have it compared to when I started and we had to use mainframes and such. So that's one thing. Like when something is incredibly bad, you also conversely have incredible opportunities for improving it. When something is reasonably good, and not at all saying design today is perfect, right? But it's much better. So the improvement potential is lower. And secondly, back in those days, with let's say the early dot-com bubble again, I mean, I know from personal experience, I could go and review a client website for like 2 hours or so and come up with a list of 10 things that if they fixed those, they would double their internet revenues. I mean, because it was so bad, it was so easy to find the problems. You could do a usability test with like 3, 4, 5 users, and you would again find glaring things. And that would be relatively easy to fix, because fixing them was mostly a matter of don't do stupid things, like the big flash animation and stuff. Just take it away. It's almost like free to take it. We shouldn't have spent money making it in the first place. So anyway, so that's why ROI was incredibly high. So why was there not more usability done in the days? Because there was a large amount of hostility against it and it was not appreciated. But the ROI was, for anybody who did do it, the ROI was very, very high because it was very bad design, so big. So that's the return, right? The improvement is could be very high. But secondly, the investment could be very, very small because only very little work was required to find those issues. Now, today, opposite problem. Design is not perfect. There's room for improvement. However, it's relatively good. So the return, when you do a redesign or you do a project of some kind, you're only going to move the needle a little bit, not like boom. Secondly, the investment is high because now you're going to do much more thorough research, thorough work to arrive at those improvements. So that means that the return is smaller, the investment is higher, therefore ROI gets to be lower. But that doesn't mean it's zero or it's negative or it's a waste of money to UX work. It just means that you don't have those like several 1,000% gains that we used to have. And so if you think about this in business, now going back to your question, right. It just means that UX is a commodity, and the word commodity, many people think of that as being bad, but it's actually good because it means it's something that's ubiquitous, universal, we all need it. It's like water, electricity, those type of things. But there is a water company, there is an electricity company, people who build power plants, that's an honest, good work and all of that. It's just that it's not like enormously special, rare. It's sort of something we expect to have. And I think it's the same with design and UX. We expect to have it. This doesn't mean that everybody has it or everybody does it the right way, but we've arrived at this situation where at least you have I would say probably most executives in technology anyway will at the minimum pay lip service to the point that they want good UX. I think most of the growth is actually not in the technology business, but rather in every other business, because software is eating the world, to take a quote from Mark Andreessen, but I really believe that. And not just software is eating the world, but AI is eating the world, and user interfaces are eating the world. They all kind of hang together. So more and more of what every business is doing is becoming driven by what we do, which means every company needs it. And some companies are going to be so small and so poor that they can't afford very much, but a lot of companies are going to be big enough that they will actually be able to afford some kind of investment. And so then it just becomes a matter of basically positioning good design and good usability work as just like the way one does business. Just the way, like you have to like have some decent accounting such that you collect your invoices and things like that. It's not like it's special or exciting, but if you don't do it, you're going to be out of business next week because you don't have any incoming cash flow if you don't collect on your invoices. And so therefore, companies do hire people for the accounting department, accounts receivable, and all those type of things, even if it's not exciting. And so that anyway, that's what I believe we need to more recognize that it's a normal, accepted way of doing things. And we should also remember, by the way, that the quality demands from the customer side are going up dramatically. That may be one of the differences when I talked about things like water and electricity. So people don't necessarily demand like water has to taste better every year. It's like we just need, when we open the tap, water has to come out, and it has to be clean. That's what you want there. But for user interface design, the quality criteria keep going up, and customers, because your expectations are set by everything else you experience, and so people who do create bad design that you could have maybe been able to get away with 10 years ago, you cannot get away with any longer because people's expectations are higher, and AI will actually help on that, by the way, because my expectation is that it will approximately double our standard of living over the next sort of 20, 30 years. And so the richer people get, the more they demand quality, and therefore people who have low quality, their product will not sell.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jakob. I actually want to get back to the second part of my question in terms of talking about what are some proof points that we can prove the value of design. One of the things that I'm actually very curious about is that with a lot of the generative AI tools that are coming out, it feels like there's a new one every single month. There's tools now, such as Lovable, Bolt, V0. These tools can literally go from prompt to a design to a working prototype to code. And I think a lot of us in the design industry are afraid that these different types of tools might take over some of our jobs. And in fact, we're hearing sometimes to actually augment a lot of our work with using these different design tools. So I'm curious, from your perspective, you have made a prediction that you see that design will actually grow significantly, particularly in-house at a lot of companies. But again, looking at the economy, we've been seeing a lot of layoffs happening at a lot of these large tech companies. We're seeing a lot of these tools coming out. So what makes you believe, and specifically what evidence do you have that these jobs will continue to grow in-house? Right.
Yeah, I think it's more in-house in any other type of industry than specifically technology. I think technology was the leader, early leader in adapting UX, like computer companies, telecommunications companies, and so forth, because they were big, and it was like directly their product to have a user interface. But today, it's actually every business. Every business, first of all, every business is a user interface because of their website and every kind of interactive thing. But also internally, more and more things get done by software, and the better you design the software, the higher the productivity. So I think most of the growth will be in-house. But at the same time, I absolutely also believe that a lot of the work that's currently done by human designers will be done by AI. And the way you can kind of square that circle or resolve that contradiction is that the total amount of work will be so much larger because of so much more things being done by software, and again, with the requirements for the quality going up. So for example, in the old days, well, the really old days, there was no usability, but then we got to this point where it was a few percent of a development project and maybe 10% of the development project. In the future, it might easily be 80% of a development project because the coding will be vibe coding, and people, there will still be a need for good engineers and good developers and software architecture. I mean, that will not go away, but the relative component of a project could easily be smaller, and the bigger component of the project becomes figuring out what should be done, and the smaller part becomes actually making it happen, because making it happen will be the job of AI, which includes making the design happen. So like doing a screen layout, drawing a pretty icon, making the color scheme, writing the copy, and all of those things. I think they will be done by AI. And the human role will be to orchestrate or synchronize all of these different things that are done by AI. So we're going to uplift the contribution of the humans to be more, almost like a kind of a manager of the AI, as opposed to the one who is doing, the handcrafted design. I think handcrafted design will go away because AI will do it better and cheaper, and that's for sure is true for things like visual design and writing, but I think actually it could also become true for more of user research and usability type of things. So I'll actually have to say speculate here, because there's one thing that I don't actually, usually I'm very assured of what I say, but this time I'm not, which is there a scaling law for usability insights the way we have AI scaling laws for so many other things, right? As we make it bigger and bigger and bigger, it can think more and more and become more and more intelligent and take on bigger and bigger tasks. So in usability, we started out with things like the 10 heuristics, which are, first of all, only 10, and secondly, very broad. But as we've been adding thousands upon thousands of insights, we're scaling up the amount of things that can be done based on what's already known. So what I think may or may not happen is that as we scale further and we have AI having analyzed hundreds of thousands of videos of user testing sessions and millions of designs and so forth, will its insights scale further to the ability that we get to this point where AI actually can just kind of know what's a good design. So I'm not sure whether or not that will happen, whether there will be a scaling law for usability insights, but there might easily be. That was certainly a big surprise in AI. It turned out the so-called bitter lesson is that we just need to have more compute, more training data, more compute, bigger data centers, and then all of a sudden it becomes a genius. And that was not, if you spend more gold, AI gets smart and bold. And that was not something that was expected, but it has proven true. Same may be the case for usability. There's a scaling law for usability, maybe. But that doesn't matter for the sake of humans, because the human role will be twofold. It will be agency. So yeah, AI can do what you tell it to do, but you've got to tell it what to do. So agency, deciding what should be done. And secondly, judgment. AI can come up with, here's like 10 solutions. For free, ideation is free with AI, but you have to have the judgment, say, no, we're going to go in this direction, not that direction. And so those are still going to be human needs. And actually, there's this third one, which is also, you will need to interact or deal with other humans, because the world is made up of humans, you see. So you've got to communicate or collaborate, and those are human skills, and some people are better and some are worse, but that's going to be one of the driving criteria for who will be successful in the future. Is basically, if you want to be crude about it, is manipulation. You've got to be able to manipulate the other people in the organization to make, so you have that agency, you have that judgment, say, this is the design we want. But you've got to convince, now I say convince is a nicer word, manipulate is the harder word. You've got to make the rest of the people buy in. And that's going to be one, those type of actions or activities are going to be the human ones. And then making the icon, making the screen design, that's the AI does that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, with that, we're at time. So I want to give Jakob a big round of applause. Thank you guys so much for listening. Yeah, I hope this talk was really inspiring, and thank you so much for ending on such an optimistic note to Jacob and inspiring all of us in terms of understanding what what the future of AI will look like. So thank you again.
Good, thank you.
All right. Enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone.